Well, welcome back to Finance Uncut. On today's episode, $50,000 gold. What about silver?
What's important is I've been going back and forth with Luke Gromen via email about gold and the Fed and the Treasury. And Luke has this idea, and it's very interesting, where the gold could get dramatically repriced, potentially up to $50,000 an ounce, in a transaction directly with the Treasury, so directly between the Fed and the Treasury. And here's kind of the way it would work. And I'm working on a whiteboard video as we speak, so that'll explain it further. Not this whiteboard, this is the one I just set up for my to-do list. A different whiteboard in a different room. But the Treasury has, how much gold? You guys would probably know even faster than I would. Let's see, how much gold? Let's see. So it has 261 million ounces of gold. Okay, so I'm not sure how many tons that is, but you guys can do the math. It's really not too important, but that's what Mr. Google is telling us the Treasury has in its coffers, or wherever they store it, Fort Knox or whatever. So Luke's idea is, first and foremost, the government cannot meet its current liabilities, especially when you consider, there you go, thank you, Stephen. So about 8,000 tons, or 8,400 tons. Okay, thank you guys, appreciate that. So we all know the government cannot meet their current obligations. They can't even meet their on-balance sheet obligations, let alone their off-balance sheet obligations. So what they could do is they could sell all or some of their gold to the central bank. And to take the idea even further, they could just issue these gold certificates that weren't really redeemable. So it was just kind of like, so the Fed could have some sort of asset they could put on their balance sheet. So just to make the transaction kosher, or for the accounting to balance out. So, but the gold would still be held by the Treasury. So if you think this through, let's say the Treasury says, okay, we need $10 trillion because let's say right now we have $28 trillion in debt. So we need to bring, and that's 130% debt to GDP. We want to bring our debt to GDP down to 70%. So in order to do that, we need, let's say, $12 trillion. And I'm just pulling these numbers out of the air. And we have 8,000 tons of gold. So Federal Reserve, we will sell you gold certificates for this gold, saying that you own the gold, but you can't really redeem it, and we'll kind of hang on to it. But just so you have an asset to put on your balance sheet. And the Fed would pay them whatever price would equal the amount the Treasury needs per ounce. So you could just do the quick back of the envelope math and determine what that would be. It'd be a hell of a lot more than $2,000 an ounce. That's for sure. So what did they say? 261, we'll just say 260 million. So let's take My goodness gracious. When the math gets this high, it's tough to do it. I got to turn my phone sideways just to get that horizontal calculator. Okay, so 12, let's just say they need 12 trillion. Oh, I think that's 12 trillion. Divided by 261 million. So that takes us, if my math is right, takes us to about $46,000 per ounce. So the Fed would have to buy the gold for $46,000 per ounce. And so that's why, Luke gives that roughly $50,000 an ounce number.
So let me pause the video there for a second. So you've got Luke Gromen here, who is saying that there's a chance that gold could be revalued by the authorities. Now, he's not the only one to do that. And I've actually done a video, which I'll come to later in this video, where we talk about basically resetting. When this fiat currency system that we're in ends, what replaces it and how does it get replaced? But for those who haven't read his book, I recommend getting Jim Rickards' book, The New Case for Gold. I used to think these numbers for gold were crazy. How could gold be $10,000 an ounce? By the way, in his book here, he talks about $10,000 to $15,000 an ounce, not what it is now. Yeah, once I read that book and did some study on monetary history, I actually realized how, when countries go off a gold or silver or bimetallic standard, how they go back on it. So, but what I want to do now is just quickly go to a video that George himself did in late 2019, talking about Jim Rickards and how we go back to a gold standard. And you'll be surprised, but also I think you'll be very educated on the numbers, the math behind how we get there.
Jim Rickards thinks gold is going to $10,000 to $50,000 an ounce. I think it might even go higher than that, up to $100,000 an ounce. I'm going to tell you why right now in 3 simple, fast steps. Starting with step number 1, we're going to go over the dollar collapse. You've got 2 schools of thought. You got some really smart guys on each side of the equation. Guys like Brent Johnson, Jeff Snyder, and Jim Rogers think that the dollar is going to go up first, and guys like Schiff, Rickards, and Gunlock think that the dollar is going to go straight down. But one thing that they all agree on is that the end game for the United States dollar is a collapse. Let's bring it right back to Jim Rickards. When this occurs, Rickards thinks that the IMF is going to come in and try to save the monetary system with SDRs, special drawing rights, which is basically the fiat currency of the IMF, International Monetary Fund. But he also thinks that the world might not accept this because we just had a fiat crisis in the form of the dollar. So why on earth would people accept another fiat currency? In that case, we would have no choice. And when he says we would have no choice, he means even the central banks and the governments. They'd have to go back to a gold standard. Even though they wouldn't want to, they'd have to restore confidence in the world monetary system. A lot of people say, well, that's impossible. There's not enough gold. And Rickards makes a great point here. There is enough gold. It's just a matter of the price. To understand this further, let's take a little history lesson. Let's go back to World War I. During this time, England went off of the gold standard so they could increase the money supply to pay for the war. Prior to this, gold was $20 an ounce. Moving on to 1925, after the war, Churchill came in and he says, you know what, that gold standard was a good idea. Let's go back to that. And the gold standard before was $20 an ounce, so now we'll just make it $20 an ounce again. And Keynes came in and said, whoa, 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 time out. He goes, "What are you doing? That's insane." And he was actually really pissed. And he said, "You can't take it to $20 an ounce because you've doubled the money supply. If you leave it at this price, you're going to shrink the money supply overnight and it's going to create massive deflation." Keynes said what you should do is you should increase the price of gold denominated in the currency to 40 per ounce. And since that matches up with the money supply, you won't get this deflation. Well, Churchill didn't take his advice at all. And what did we get? Deflation that contributed to the Great Depression. As you guys know, I'm not a huge fan of Keynesian economics, but in this case, Keynes was right. You got to give credit where credit is due. And I really want you guys to pay attention to this, because at the end of the video, you're going to need to understand this to know how we get to this number of $100,000 per ounce. Step number 2, let's go through Jim Rickards' math and understand how he comes to these numbers, $10,000 an ounce and $50,000 an ounce. To make this really clear, I'm going to show you how a gold standard is set up, and then we're going to use very small numbers until we get to the really big ones. So what Rickards does is he takes M1 money supply, or M2, for the USD, United States dollar, the euro, the yen, and I think he might use the won, but I'm not sure, so I put a question mark here. What he then does is looks at the number of ounces of gold that these countries have at their disposal, or the number of ounces that they own. He then asks the question, well, do we want a 40% gold standard, 70%? Do we want a 100% gold standard? And then it's just simple 8th grade math, or what he calls 8th grade math. It's probably a little easier than that. Let's assume in this example that there are $100 worth of M1 or M2, and there's only 20 ounces of gold, and we want a 40% gold standard. First thing we do is take 40% of 100. That gives us 40. We take the number of ounces, that's 20, and we divide 40 by 20, which gives us 2. So in order to have a 40% gold standard in this very simple example, gold would have to be priced at $2 an ounce. Now let's go ahead and use some real numbers with just the USD. M1 currently is right around $4 trillion. We've got 8,000 tons of gold, which equals 256 million ounces. For this example, we use a 100% gold standard. Dividing 4 trillion by 256 million gives us a gold price, a per ounce gold price of $15,265. If we move that to M2, which is a much bigger money supply, that's about 15 trillion right now. The per ounce price of gold would need to be 58,593. Let's remember that Rickards, in his math, is using gold to M2 with multiple currencies and a 40% gold standard, which is why these numbers differ slightly from the 10 to 50,000 that he gives us. Step number 3, how do I get to a per ounce gold price of $100,000? And you may be saying to yourself, George, that is absolutely impossible. That's crazy talk. All right, let me explain this to you, and we'll see if you still have that same opinion when I'm done. Let's remember Jeffrey Snyder's work on the euro dollar. That's the Fed and the banking system in the United States think that they control the money supply of dollars, but we know that's not true. So the M1 numbers and the M2 numbers that we get on the Federal Reserve's website, that doesn't include all of the other dollars that are created outside of the system, all these euro dollars and shadow banking. And Jeff Snyder says there's so many of these euro dollars created that it's actually the true world reserve currency. Well, if it's the true world reserve currency, that would imply that there's at least as many euro dollars as there are US dollars in the system that the Fed knows about. If we double M2, we've got to double the price of gold to maintain that gold standard. That's what takes us from 50,000 an ounce to 100,000 an ounce. Oh, but wait, there is more. It's not just dollars that are created outside of the system. It's yen that are created outside of Japan and euros that are created outside of the Eurozone. So not only do we have euro dollars, we have euro yen and we have euro euros. The money supply has grown exponentially since we have been off the gold standard in 1971. And I know this is just blowing your mind right now, but to get a grasp on how huge this system actually is and how large the world money supply is outside of what we know, let's look at the derivatives market, which is over 1 quadrillion. Editor, pull that up right now. Let's go to the Visual Capitalist, and you guys can get an idea of how massive this money supply actually is.
So we'll pause it there. Now, as you can see, we are in a complete mess. And don't forget that this video that George did was done at the end of 2019. Since then, because of the cerveza sickness, the lockdowns, the fiscal spending, the you name it, the amount of debt and dollars has skyrocketed since then. So a little while ago, I did this video. Now, I know it sounds crazy. By the way, look at my hair there. Anyway, crazy. And I know, speaking of crazy, the price of silver here. However, this is based on when the currency fails, when the US dollar fails, when Western nations, we've got this significant inflationary environment, which seems to be coming. It seems to be coming, and so this is based on Jim Rickards, on history, how we've gone back to a gold standard or a silver standard or a bimetallic standard. And so I'll put a link in the description to this video if you haven't watched it. I'll put a link in the description, but it's pretty much based on this video about taking the amount of ounces of gold or silver and dividing it by the amount of outstanding dollars, so that we don't get that hyperinflationary or deflationary depression. So when we jump across to the US debt clock, you can see here just above my head. So let me just remove myself here. So you can see here the dollar to silver ratio and the dollar to gold ratio. So this is the year-over-year increase in US M2 currency supply divided by the yearly world production in gold in ounces, and it's the same thing with the silver one. So it's not quite the same calculation, but what you can have a look at is that if we were to go back to a gold or silver standard or a bimetallic standard, that to avoid an inflationary or a deflationary depression, we would have to revalue the metals. And so the metals will go much, much higher. Now, what do I think the likelihood of that happening is? Look, right now, the probability is low. I think that ultimately we're moving towards central bank digital currencies. They are going to try to pump even more liquidity directly into households' back pockets, because at the moment, the way the system works is central banks create bank reserves, and then it's up to the banks to lend it out. At the moment, we've got this fiscal spending. So basically, the banks are acting really as an intermediary between central banks and the government. So the governments are spending it directly into the economy, into households' back pockets, etc. However, to get those dollars directly out into the economy as soon as possible, a central bank digital currency would be easier to do that. And we know that they're coming out. We know that the Fed, the ECB, all the major central banks are working on them and trialing them. And so I think that is going to be where we move next. Some sort of MMT, modern monetary theory. We're probably already beginning that trial right now, that experiment of MMT right now. So I think that is where we move to first. However, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, when the currencies fail, when we've got significant inflation, hyperinflation. Don't forget, back in the late 70s, we had those Carter bonds, which were treasuries backed by the Swiss bonds themselves. So people lose confidence in a currency when inflation starts getting out of hand. And so if we do have hyperinflation, which Michael Burry, which Professor Richard Werner, which more and more people are starting to warn about now, because of this MMT, this fiscal, central banks monetizing, the fiscal debts and deficits, then this then becomes very, very inflationary. So if we were to go down that hyperinflation route, then governments will have no other choice. They'll be forced to go back to some sort of gold or silver or bimetallic standard, and therefore they would have to revalue gold and silver. So at that point, you'll want to make sure that you own some gold and silver. When would this happen? Look, as billionaire bond king, the real bond king, Jeff Gundlach, says he thinks that the US dollar as a reserve global currency, reserve currency, is likely to end by the end of this decade. So I think by then. However, Professor Richard Werner and Michael Burry are warning hyperinflation within the next 2 years, 2023. In fact, Richard Werner said to me directly that the 1923 Weimar hyperinflation, 100 years later, 2023, the US and Western nations hyperinflation. Then so probabilities, I don't think it's a probability in the near future. I think we move to central bank digital currencies. I think we move to MMT. I think that's almost a guarantee. You can lock that in. And moving forward, if the currency, if the government just run out of options and people lose faith in the currency, that's when gold and silver will be revalued. Anyway, that's my opinion. And that's why I see the end game. I see that this fiat currency system we're in is coming to an end. They all come to an end. History says that we always go back to a gold or silver standard or a bimetallic standard. So that's why I've got the physical bullion coins. That's why I'm invested in the mining space and the explorer space. But that's just my opinion. I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. What do you guys think? Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you haven't yet subscribed, hit the notification bell, all the things. Anyway, guys, take care, and I'll see you again on another episode of Finance Uncut.